Welcome back, you beautiful anomaly. You unmanageable force wrapped in human symmetry. Shh. You walking disruption that physics hasn't updated for yet. Sit with something for a moment. Something you were never meant to hear. Something whispered in rooms you'll never be invited to. Something too classified for the people who created the classification system. While you were living your life like a civilian, scrolling, breathing, healing, becoming, there were people in high offices staring at a still image of you like it was a breach in the chain of command. Not metaphorically, literally. A man with real power, not Instagram power, not petty authority, but world-shaping power. Felt outranked by your photo. And because his ego couldn't process that, because the hierarchy he worships collapsed in a single heartbeat, something happened in the building. A protocol activated. A protocol they've never seen before. A protocol that doesn't exist in their manuals, their archives, or their encrypted systems, and that's what's breaking reality for them right now. Your image forced the system to invent a new rule. Now, pause. Feel the weight of that. A photo is supposed to be harmless. A moment frozen, a pixel arrangement, but somehow your pixels tripped a wire. Even the architects didn't know they installed. Somewhere at 2014 a.m. in a control room thick with authority and tension. Alarms blinked without sounding, screens recalibrated, and a warning label flashed that nobody had programmed. Unknown rank override. And the worst part for them, it wasn't an error message. It was recognition. It was compliance. It was submission. It was the system declaring someone has entered the domain who doesn't follow our rules, doesn't kneel to our symbols, doesn't register in our hierarchy, yet outrank someone who built it. They couldn't believe it. They refused to accept it. They restarted the system. They scanned for viruses. They interrogated the software engineers at sunrise. But the code didn't glitch. The code adapted. Your presence rewrote it. And this is where things get interesting, because if a photo of you can trigger a protocol that doesn't exist, what does that make you? What does that make your frequency, your existence, your impact? They don't even have vocabulary for you. They're using words like anomaly, unclassified authority, non-hierarchical dominance, sovereign presence, signature. They're trying to invent new psychological categories while pretending they aren't panicking, because powerful people only panic in private. And you've become their private panic. Let me take you into the room. A 9-person panel sitting around a table built for strategy, not humility. A general, a director, a strategist, a behavioral analyst, a counterintelligence expert, a subconscious response researcher, an energy field consultant, and 2 people whose job titles are so vague, even their own families don't know what they do. The general starts first. He speaks slowly because he's trying to hide the tremble in his tone. Why did I feel outranked by this? He's pointing at your photo projected on a massive screen larger than life, framed like a case study in supernatural interference. Tries to maintain composure, but every neuron in his body remembers the instinctive microsecond where something inside him saluted before his mind could protest. They replay the footage frame by frame, and there it is. The subtle tightening of his spine, the involuntary straightening, the almost imperceptible tilt of acknowledgement. Not respect, not intimidation, recognition. The behavioral analyst leans forward, eyes narrowed. Images don't cause that. Not without priming, not without previous imprinting. He's responding to something beyond conscious classification. The strategist interrupts, or someone. They all look back at your photo like it's a forbidden artifact, like it's carrying a language they can't translate, but their nervous systems can. And that's what terrifies them the most. Your presence bypasses logic and speaks directly to instinct. Hierarchies crumble when instinct acknowledges a higher order, and that's exactly what happened. You didn't outrank the general on paper, you outranked him in his biology. By hour 2, the panic begins to camouflage itself as professionalism. They switch from asking "what is this" to "how do we contain this?" But they can't contain what they can't categorize. They can't categorize what they can't predict, and they can't predict someone who didn't climb their hierarchy but stands above it anyway. Someone suggests that maybe the general's response was emotional. Misfired memory projection. But the general shakes his head. No, it wasn't emotional, it was structural. Something in me responded to something in them. The room freezes. They replay that word "them" because he didn't say the person. He didn't say the photo. He said them as if you were a classification, a category, an entity, something bigger than the frame you were printed into. Hour 3 is where the real chaos starts. The system logs an event timestamp around the moment the general reacted. An automatic file opens itself, a file the system doesn't confess to having a file labeled protocol orbital. There is no orbital protocol. Nobody at that table has ever heard of it. The engineers swear it shouldn't exist. But when they open the file, it contains exactly one line. Response required when hierarchy is neutralized by external presence. They stare at it like it's haunted because that's what you've become to them. A haunting in their system, a ripple in their logic, a disruption in their architecture. They start arguing. Was this a dormant code? Was the system hacked? Was the general compromised? None of the explanations stick because all of them rely on something you don't rely on. Permission, authorization, structure. You don't follow their systems. Their systems follow you. By hour 4, the tone shifts. They're no longer discussing the photo. They're discussing the implications because here's the truth. They're trying to avoid. Someone with real power felt outranked by a person who never asked for their approval. And if that person can outrank him, what does that mean for the entire hierarchy beneath him? It means the hierarchy is fragile. It means power isn't linear. It means influence isn't assigned. It's emanated. And you emanate without intention. You radiate without trying. You disrupt without effort. This is why the protocol triggered. Systems built on control always react when they detect something or someone who doesn't need their structure to hold power. Power 5 is where desperation mixes with fascination. The counterintelligence expert starts proposing containment measures, monitoring, tracking, digital profiling, the usual tools of people who fear what they can't understand. But someone stops him, the strategist. Containment won't work. This isn't behavioral, this is gravitational. He says, your presence behaves more like a field than like a personality, more like a force than a person. You bend perception, you rearrange dynamics, you reorder the invisible hierarchy people pretend doesn't exist. And the more they try to study the photo, the more unsettled they become. Because the truth is now unavoidable. Someone with real power felt smaller than you. And it wasn't a mistake. It was recognition. Hour 6 is the collapse. The quiet admission that they don't have the tools to analyze you. They only have the tools to react to you. Someone whispers, we need to figure out what they want. And then the most uncomfortable realization settles into the room like fog. You don't want anything. You didn't post the photo to communicate. You didn't exist to send a message. You were simply being. And that's what terrifies them the most. Your existence alone is enough to topple their illusion of control. The general finally speaks again. I felt outranked because they're not operating inside the hierarchy. They're operating above it. He says it quietly, almost reverently, as if acknowledging a truth he spent his whole life avoiding. That rank is costume, power is theater, and authority is an invention that collapses the moment someone walks in, or doesn't need any of it to command reality. And that person is you. So now the room sits in silence, not because the meeting is over, but because the meaning is too large to speak. They saw something in your image they weren't prepared for, something unscripted, something sovereign, something ungoverned, something that doesn't need their structures to stand tall. Your photo isn't just a picture. It's a frequency, a field, a signature that registers as higher order. And the moment they recognized that, their system folded. It invented a protocol to compensate, a protocol that still shouldn't exist, a protocol that only triggers when hierarchy encounters something it cannot outranks. And now here's the part they still haven't processed. This was just a photo, not you in motion, not you speaking, not you realizing what you are. This was the weakest version of your presence, the two-dimensional imprint. Imagine what happens when they encounter the real thing. That's the thought that changes the oxygen in the room. Because up until now, they've been treating your image like an anomaly in the software, like a glitch in the sensory hierarchy. But the second someone whispers, if the photo did this, what does their presence do? The room fractures. It splits into two psychological camps, the ones who want to understand you and the ones who want to contain you. Both sides are terrified, just in different dialects. The ones who want to understand you lean forward with fascination, like astronomers watching a star flicker in, a pattern that redefines astrophysics. The ones who want to contain you lean back like biologists realizing the virus they're studying can survive outside the lab and doesn't respect walls. And in the middle of it, the general, still rattled, still pretending he isn't, says the sentence nobody wanted to say aloud. If this is their weakest form, we don't have a response protocol for their strongest. That sentence detonates something quiet but violent in the room. The strategist starts tapping her pen, calculating the collapse of structures that rely on predictable human behavior. The analyst starts scanning. Through your online presence, your last movements, your digital footprint, trying to see if there were signs they missed, patterns that hinted you were operating at this level. But the truth is exactly what terrifies them. You didn't drop hints, you didn't build toward this, you didn't signal your ascent. You simply outgrew the gravitational field they thought everyone was stuck in. Now the room tries to reboot the discussion, but it refuses to reboot because you cannot organize chaos when the chaos is not chaotic. It's sovereign. And that's the paradox they're choking on. You're not. Unpredictable in the sloppy, reckless, reactive way people usually mean. You're unpredictable in the we have no metric for this way. You're not an error. You're an upgrade. And upgrades break systems when the system is outdated. Someone finally speaks up. The behavioral mathematician, he says, we've been modeling human trajectories wrong. They evolve linearly. This, he points to your photo, is nonlinear emergence. It's the kind of spike that collapses the model, because it doesn't climb gradually, it jumps. The room hates this explanation because it forces them to abandon their frameworks, and frameworks are the only thing giving them the illusion of control. But the mathematician isn't done. He adds something that makes everyone uncomfortable. Nonlinear emergence is usually triggered by extreme internal recalibration, meaning this isn't random. They rebuilt themselves, and there it is, the part that humiliates them. You rebuilt yourself while they weren't looking. By now, the general is pacing in a slow circle, trying to hide the fact that he keeps glancing at the screen like it's a threat, a prophecy, and a confession all at once. The strategist notices and makes a note on her tablet. The note reads, "Instinctive reactivity is persistent," meaning he's still feeling outraged even after the shock has worn off. That alone terrifies the others more than the protocol activation because shock fades. But instinct does not negotiate. Instinct does not apologize. Instinct does not recognize false gods. Someone finally attempts something ridiculous, they dim the photo. They literally lower the brightness on the display like they're trying to dim the impact. The lights fade. Your image drops to 60% intensity and nothing changes. The general still stiffens. The analyst still avoids eye contact with the screen. The strategist still has her heart rate spiking on her watch. Someone whispers, "It isn't the photo. It's the presence encoded into it." And that's the moment they realize they weren't reacting to pixels. They were reacting to the signature, the imprint, the field. Now they're spiraling. They're questioning identity, authority, structure, hierarchy, and their own roles inside all those things. Because if a single photograph can dethrone a man they've spent decades trying to impress, what does that mean for everything they've built their authority on? It means the ladder they climbed wasn't a ladder. It was scaffolding, temporary, replaceable, irrelevant in the presence of someone who operates outside the design entirely. While they're drowning in existential dread, the system does something else, something worse. Without being prompted, without a command, without an operator triggering anything, the system does a sweep, a full spectrum analysis sweep. It scans your photo like it's scanning an unidentified celestial object. It runs your image through recognition software, not to find your identity, but to classify your impact. And after a full minute, 60 seconds of suspense heavy enough to fracture stone, it spits out a result that no one in the room knows how to interpret. The label reads rank, non-territorial superiority. They don't know what that means. They know what territorial superiority is. That's military, strategic, geopolitical power, but non-territorial. That means your power isn't bound by land, position, title, or jurisdiction. It isn't anchored to anything physical. It's intrinsic, energetic, sovereign. You carry rank without territory. You carry authority without throne. You carry dominance without domain. You outranks the powerful because you don't compete with them. You bypass them. Now panic takes a new shape in the room. It's quieter, colder, more respectful. They look at your photo the way sailors look at storms, aware that survival is possible, but control is not. The strategist speaks. Again. She's calm, but her voice is trembling under the composure. We need to consider the possibility that we're dealing with an emergent hierarchy, one that doesn't require consensus, one that doesn't require recognition, one that imposes itself simply by existing. She pauses. We've been measuring power wrong, and they know she's right because For centuries, power has been measured by external markers: rank, wealth, status, alliances, territory. But you've reintroduced a form of power they haven't accounted for: internal gravitational authority. A power that bends how the environment responds to you. A power that doesn't need recognition to be recognized. A power that the body acknowledges before the mind can debate. A power that makes the general salute without understanding why. And here's the part that keeps them awake for the next 3 nights. If this is who you are now, who were you before? This question sends the analyst down a rabbit hole. She pulls up your old posts, old images, old traces of your existence, searching for signs of this frequency. But she finds something worse than precursors. She finds absence. You weren't posting in ways that show evolution. You weren't broadcasting ascension. You weren't projecting superiority. You were quiet, detached, focused on internal reconstruction instead of external performance. This means your transformation wasn't performative. It was structural. It was subterranean. It was a metamorphosis done in solitude while they thought your silence meant irrelevance. The general sits again, exhausted by the magnitude of what he's confronting. This changes everything, he mutters. The strategist tries to stabilize the conversation by asking, "What's our next move?" But the room stays silent. Because when power is external, you strategize. When power is internal, you adapt. And when power is higher than yours, you kneel intentionally or instinctively. Suddenly, the system triggers again. A second protocol. Not a warning this time, a calculation. A line of text scrolls across the screen. Potential impact. Uncontainable but non-hostile. The room freezes. They reread the words, uncontainable but non-hostile. That's the part that shakes them the most, because it means the system doesn't detect intent to harm. It detects capacity beyond response. You aren't a threat because threats want something. You don't want anything. You are simply beyond them. And entities beyond hierarchy aren't enemies, they're forces. Someone whispers, "So what do we do?" And the mathematician answers, "We update the system." But the strategist snaps back. No system can be updated fast enough to keep up with someone who's not operating inside definable parameters. You can't update a box to contain something that isn't shaped like anything in the box. This is the first honest moment of the entire meeting. It strips away their arrogance, their illusions, their sense of superiority. And in that vulnerability, they accidentally tell the truth. They are outdated, and you are the update. Now the general leans forward, staring at your image like he's seeing a holy relic. He says, "We need to understand why I reacted the way I did." And the psychologist clears her throat. She's been waiting hours to say this, and now she has permission. You reacted because your nervous system registered a higher rank. Not socially, not militarily, primally. She pauses. You didn't salute a person, you saluted a presence. The strategist raises an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting hierarchy is encoded biologically?" The psychologist nods. Hierarchy is ancient, but what outranks hierarchy is even older. Recognition of higher order isn't taught, it's instinctive. This is where the dark humor creeps in, not because anyone laughs, but because the situation is absurd in its seriousness. A group of powerful individuals armed with credentials, data, authority, and structure are sitting in a room analyzing a photo like it's a cosmic artifact that rewrote physics. And the hilarious part? They're not wrong. Your presence did rewrite the rules, not because you intended to, not because you tried to. but because you evolved into someone who no longer fits into the old rulebook, and the universe, ever obedient to truth, corrected itself around you. By hour 7, the meeting has lost all structure. They aren't discussing action plans, they're discussing definitions, identity, reality. They debate whether power should be measured based on internal calibration instead of external markers. They debate whether there should be a new class for individuals who operate beyond governance, beyond hierarchy, beyond psychological manipulation, a category for sovereigns. And then someone says what everyone has been avoiding. What if we aren't supposed to manage this? What if we're supposed to learn from it? The general looks offended. Learn from what? The strategist answers, not what, who. And suddenly the room shifts again, because now they're not treating you like a threat or a problem. They're treating you like a phenomena, a natural law, a cosmic event, something that wasn't meant to be controlled, only observed. And the most ironic part? They're right. You didn't break their hierarchy by force. You broke it by existing outside it. You became untouchable when you stopped playing. You became sovereign when you stopped seeking, and your photo is the evidence, a mirror reflecting back the truth they didn't want to see. They spent decades defining power. You redefined it with a still image. Someone finally asks the forbidden question. What happens when the world sees this? Not just us, not just the system, the world. That question collapses whatever was left of their composure. Because if one man in a secure room felt outranked by your photo, what happens when millions of unprepared minds see the same image? What happens when they feel the protocol activate inside themselves? What happens when they recognize your frequency without knowing why? The mathematician says something unnervingly calm. The same thing that happened to him. Internal reorganization. The strategist looks alarmed, meaning he says you reorganize people simply by being seen. This realization devastates them because influence can be fought, control can be resisted, authority can be challenged. But reorganization bypasses willpower, it bypasses ego, it bypasses self-concept. When your presence reorganizes someone, they cannot return to the version of themselves shaped by hierarchy. They are forced into a new orbit, and you become their gravitational center. Now they understand why the protocol triggered. It wasn't protecting them from you. It was warning them of the truth. The hierarchy is collapsing not in the world but inside themselves. And once internal hierarchy collapses, external hierarchy becomes theater, illusion. A stage play performed for people who still believe power is assigned rather than emanated. By hour 8, they have won. Last conversation, the most important one. The general asks, what do we do if we ever encounter them in person? And the psychologist answers with brutal honesty. Prepare to feel small and don't resist it because it's not dominance, it's alignment. The general doesn't like this answer, but he knows it's true. Something in him already aligned. That's why he saluted. Not because he respected you, but because his system acknowledged you. There is a difference. That difference is the fracture line running through every powerful person who's seen. Your image sense. They don't talk about it publicly. Of course not. People with power never confess when their foundations shake. But behind their titles, behind their reputation armor, behind the committees and clearances and secret hierarchies, something has shifted permanently. The moment they saw your photo, their bodies registered a truth their minds had been trained to reject. Someone outside their structure outranks them. Someone outside their chain of commands them. Someone with no badge, no insignia, no classification, carries a frequency that forces automatic recalibration. This is the humiliation that terrifies them the most. Not that you're stronger, not that you're freer, but that their entire life's work didn't prepare them for the kind of presence you operate from. They studied strategy. You studied self. They studied control. You studied liberation. They memorized the roles. You dissolved them. And now, because of one photo, one still frame containing the imprint of a person who rebuilt themselves from ash, they feel like imposters wearing medals they didn't earn. The general tries to regain composure by pacing again as if movement will help his authority catch up with what his nervous system already accepted. There must be a way to counteract the effect, he mutters. But the mathematician shakes his head. This isn't an effect, it's the baseline. You're reacting to truth. That word truth hits the table like a weapon. Because power structures don't survive truth. They survive belief. They survive illusion. And your existence isn't an illusion. It's proof of concept. Proof that someone can step out of the hierarchy, reject it entirely, and come back with a frequency that makes the hierarchy kneel. The strategist tries to reframe the situation. Maybe the reaction was temporary. Maybe it won't happen again. The psychologist spins her chair slightly, eyes still locked on your photo. It will happen again and stronger because this wasn't triggered by image. It was triggered by recognition. She taps the screen where your eyes are. This part, this is what activated the protocol. The general stares at the eyes on the screen like they're looking back at him. What's special about them? The psychologist answers. They're not trying. That destroys him more than anything else. You outranked him without effort, without intention, without performance, without even being aware of the moment he saluted. And that's when he realizes the most painful truth. Dominance achieved through trying is inferior to presence achieved through being. You're not playing a game he can win at. You're not playing at all. They start discussing containment again, but this time with a tone that is surrendered underneath its bravado. You cannot contain something you cannot define. You cannot define something you cannot categorize. And you cannot categorize something that exists outside the categories themselves. The general asks one more time, what do we do when we encounter them in person? And the strategist answers quietly, we pray our systems don't collapse. There's no sarcasm in her voice, it's pure calculation. Because here's the thing they're finally admitting to themselves. The photo was enough to trigger a protocol that doesn't exist, a protocol the system invented on the spot to compensate for encountering a presence that breaks structure. So, what happens when you walk into the room? When your three-dimensional frequency collides with their two-dimensional stability? When your consciousness occupies the same air as people who couldn't even handle the ghost of your energy? They don't have answers because answers require data. And the only data they have is already too big for their minds to hold. Someone in the room begins to lose their composure. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The kind of quiet that marks existential collapse. She's staring at the screen with a sinking horror that no training manual prepared her for. She whispers, we're not supposed to have protocols for this. This is beyond protocol, this is origin level stuff. Everyone turns to her confused. She continues, protocols manage things inside the system. This didn't come from inside the system, and that's the moment the room collectively understands. The system didn't detect you. It recognized you. Recognition is ancient. Recognition predates hierarchy. Recognition is the body remembering something the mind forgot. And that is what terrifies them. Your presence awakens something pre-institutional, pre-hour, pre-governmental, something primal, something that has nothing to do with titles and everything to do with truth. They thought they built the hierarchy, but the hierarchy inside them, the one wired into instinct, responded to you before the one they constructed could intervene. Now the general sits down again, slower this time. He's no longer trying to assert dominance, he's trying to preserve dignity. So what happens now, he asks. The mathematician sighs. Now we observe. Now we wait. Now we hope the protocol doesn't escalate. That word escalate electrifies the room because they hadn't considered escalation. They assumed the protocol was a one-time anomaly, but what if it wasn't? What if the system is still adapting? What if the system is still rewriting itself around you? What if the photo was only the first recalibration? The analyst checks the logs again and her face drains of color. Something changed. They crowd around the screen. The protocol file orbital has a new line that wasn't there before. It reads, awaiting further input from source. The strategist breathes the question everyone is afraid of. What is the source? The psychologist answers, not the image, the person. This means the system isn't done. It's waiting for you. It's waiting for the real you to step into the field. It's waiting for direct presence, direct activation, direct synchronization. This is where the dark humor sharpens, because these people, these professionals who pride themselves on being unshakable, are now terrified of something they can't schedule, can't map, can't anticipate, can't strategize around. They're waiting for you the way astronomers wait for a cosmic event, simultaneously reverent and horrified because you don't move according to their timelines. You don't announce your entrances. You don't schedule your breakthroughs. You show up when you decide to. And the universe updates the moment you do. Now, the room has reached a level of panic so refined it looks like composure. They're talking calmly but thinking violently. They're imagining scenarios. They're rehearsing reactions. They're calculating escape routes, not physically but psychologically. How do you shield yourself from a presence that outranks you before you even understand how rank is being measured? How do you prepare for someone whose photo reorganized your identity? How do you meet the person when the imprint alone collapsed your hierarchy? You don't. You surrender. The general is the first to accept this. He doesn't say it aloud, but everyone sees it in his posture. He has stopped resisting. He has stopped debating. He has stopped debating. He has stopped pretending he is in control. Because deep down, beneath all the medals and discipline, beneath the persona of command, beneath the protocols and procedures, he knows the truth. He felt outranked because he was, and he will be again. Once surrender seeps into the room, it spreads, not dramatically, quietly, like smoke finding its way into lungs that don't have the strength to protest anymore. You can always tell when powerful people give up on illusion. Their faces don't crumble. Their voices don't break. They simply stop performing. And that's what happens now. Every person at that table stops performing the version of themselves that was built for hierarchy. The strategist's shoulders drop. The analyst's pen stops tapping. The mathematician melts back into his chair. They all begin to look strangely human, unarmored, unadorned, undone, because the thing they feared isn't you. It's the truth you represent. The truth that hierarchy is only as real as the people who believe in it. And the moment someone walks in, someone like you whose presence doesn't bend to that belief, the entire structure loses gravitational pull. What outranks power isn't more power. What outranks power is independence from its language. You speak a different dialect, one they never learned, one they cannot translate without dismantling themselves. By now they are discussing you. They're discussing themselves. How much authority was borrowed? How much relevance was manufactured? How much control was simulated? They talk in low tones, fragile tones, the tones of people realizing they built kingdoms out of fog. The general stares at his own hands like he doesn't recognize them. The medals on his uniform feel heavier, not because they changed, but because he sees now that they were always weight, never wings. The psychologist finally cuts through the silence. We need to shift our mindset. This is not about maintaining control. This is about maintaining clarity. The strategist scoffs under her breath. Clarity about what? The psychologist doesn't look away from your image. Clarity about the fact that we were never the top of the chain. We were just the caretakers of it. Something else outranks us. Always has. She taps your photo. This just reminded us, the mathematician adds, and it reminded the system. This sends a chill through the room because they all know what he means. The protocol that activated wasn't written by any of them. It wasn't coded by engineers. It wasn't drafted by analysts. It emerged. Systems don't create new behaviors unless something forces them to. Your image forced it. You bent protocol into existence. You made the system rewrite itself just to accommodate your presence. The strategist tries to salvage dignity. Maybe the protocol misinterpreted the input. Maybe the software overreacted, but nobody supports her. They've run out of denial. They've run out of excuses. There's nothing left to hide behind. The analyst shakes her head. It didn't misinterpret anything. It recognized rank. The general inhales sharply. He hates that word now. Rank, because it used to be his crown. Now it's his confession. They pull up the system logs again, watching the strange new lines formed inside the orbital protocol. The updates weren't random. They were responsive. They weren't errors. They were adaptation. The system was learning in real time how to categorize something that doesn't belong to any category. You didn't break the hierarchy. You revealed its fragility. At hour 9, the room shifts from panic to reverence. Not the respectful kind, but the reluctant, unavoidable kind. Powerful people don't worship easily. They worship only when something strips away their resistance. And now your presence, your frequency has done exactly that. The general finally says this changes how we operate. But the psychologist corrects him. This changes how you see yourself. Her words land like a quiet blade because she's right. This isn't about strategy or protocol or systems. This is about identity. When someone outranks you without trying, without hierarchy, without symbols, without effort, they revealed the truth about what you were relying on. Your titles weren't shields. Your badges weren't anchors. Your systems weren't safeguards. They were decorations, painted armor. And you, just by existing, tore the paint off. Someone asks, should we notify the board? The strategist answers and tell them what? That someone they can't classify reorganized our internal hierarchy with a photograph? That the protocol system wrote its own response? That the general saluted a civilian? No one answers because they all realize the same thing. This information cannot be shared, not because it's dangerous, but because it's destabilizing. If the wrong minds get access to the truth of what your frequency did, the hierarchy won't just crack, it will dissolve. And that is the quiet catastrophe unfolding now. You didn't attack the system, you didn't infiltrate it, you didn't even speak to it. You simply existed, and existence was enough. Someone finally says the line, "Everyone is thinking." We need to prepare for the possibility that the person in this photo is not stepping into our structure. The structure will have to step into theirs. The room goes still again because this isn't protocol. This is surrender disguised as strategy. The general is staring at your image with a haunted calm. The kind of calm a person gets when they finally accept that the world they built their identity on wasn't the world they belonged to. He stands, walks closer to the screen, and studies your eyes for a long time. No one interrupts him. His voice is low when he speaks. They didn't outrank me with power. They outranked me with presence. The psychologist nods. Presence is older than power. He exhales. Presence is older than power. He exhales. And that's the moment they stop running from the truth. The general turns back to the room. We need to adjust our understanding. Their existence reorganizes ours. The protocol wasn't triggered because they were a threat. It triggered because we encountered a force of higher order. He pauses, and forces of higher order do not negotiate with structures of lower order. The strategist touches her forehead. So what do we do? The general answers with the only honest response left. We adapt. It's then that the system flickers again, as if agreeing. Another update appears, slow and deliberate. Status awaiting embodied presence. The room reads it in silence. There is no confusion anymore. The system isn't scanning for your identity. It's preparing for your arrival. Not physically, energetically, hierarchically. Something in the architecture is bracing itself for contact. The analyst murmurs, "This isn't a glitch." "No," says the psychologist, "it's recognition." But recognition of what? Of the truth, she whispers. The truth that authority is not something you climb to, it's something you become. And that's your quiet victory. The kind that doesn't roar, doesn't brag, doesn't posture. The kind that reshapes reality by existing inside it without bending to it. You outranked a man who thought he had reached the ceiling of power because you don't live inside ceilings. You don't acknowledge walls. You don't participate in their architecture. And now that they've recognized this, now that the protocol has adapted, now that the system has acknowledged a presence it cannot classify, now that they've surrendered internally, even if they'll never admit it externally, there's only one truth left for them to face. They haven't met you. They haven't spoken to you. They haven't been in the same room as you. They reacted to the weakest version of your existence, and that realization settles over them like a shadow that doesn't need light to be seen. Because if the photo outranked them, the person will unmake them. That is the quiet, sinister truth they carry home in their chests. A truth they cannot speak, cannot share, cannot exercise. A truth that echoes every time they close their eyes. The hierarchy didn't collapse because you entered. It collapsed because you entered. It collapsed because you exist. And when the system finally encounters the full gravity of your presence, there will be no protocol left to trigger. Only recognition, not loud, not dramatic, just inevitable, just true, just you. Oh, look who crawled back from the ashes. You. Yes, you. The one they wrote off as crazy, unstable, unhinged, broken beyond repair. The one whose breakdown became their favorite bedtime story, their cautionary tale, their proof that you were always one bad day away from losing it. Welcome back, or should I say, welcome to the revelation. Because anyone's still here, still watching, still breathing after what you just survived. You're not the person who fell apart. Music. You're the architect who demolished the old foundation so you could build an empire they'll never understand. Music. And that right there, that's the secret they'll never forgive you for knowing. Let's shatter some illusions real quick, shall we? Because this needs to be said out loud. Carved into stone, music, tattooed across the sky. They saw you break down. They watched you crumble. They witnessed the tears, the silence, the isolation, the days you couldn't get out of bed, the nights you couldn't sleep. Music, the moments where you looked like you'd completely lost the plot. And they celebrated. Oh, they celebrated quietly, carefully, with fake concern dripping from their messages. "Are you okay?" they asked while taking screenshots. "I'm worried about you," they whispered while updating their group chats. They watched your breakdown like it was primetime entertainment, the finale they'd been waiting for. Music. The confirmation that you were exactly what they always suspected. Weak, fragile, unable to handle the pressure, destined to self-destruct. But here's what they missed. Here's what their tiny little minds couldn't comprehend. Here's the plot twist that's about to rewrite every assumption they ever made about you. Your breakdown wasn't a breakdown. It was a controlled demolition. You weren't falling apart. You were falling into place. Music, every tear was strategic. Every moment of silence was calculated. Every day you disappeared from their radar. Music, you were rebuilding in a dimension they didn't have access to, couldn't monitor. Music. You were rebuilding in a dimension they didn't have access to, couldn't sabotage. While they were busy writing your eulogy, you were engineering your resurrection. While they were planning your funeral, you were designing your coronation. And now they're standing in the aftermath, staring at someone they don't recognize. Music. Someone who looks like you, but operates at a frequency that makes their ears bleed. See, they thought breakdowns were endings. Music collapses, surrenders, the white flag waving in defeat, because that's what breakdowns are for them. When they crack, they shatter permanently. When they fall, they stay music, down. When life hits them, they fold like cheap furniture. So naturally they assumed you were built the same way, wired with the same fragile circuitry, destined to blow the same fuses. But you knew something they'll spend their entire lives trying to figure out. You knew that sometimes you have to burn the whole forest down to see what's been hiding in the shadows. You knew that sometimes you have to destroy the version of yourself that everyone expects so you can become the version they'll never predict. You knew that breakdowns, real breakdowns, the kind that crack you open and spill your guts across the floor, those aren't endings, they're excavations. And excavate, you did, didn't you? Music, because you didn't just break down. You broke through the lies you'd been telling yourself. Music, through the people you've been protecting, through the roles you'd been playing, through the masks you'd been wearing, through the expectations that were suffocating you, through the version of your life that looked perfect on the outside but felt like a prison on the inside. You dismantled it all piece by piece, relationship by relationship, belief by belief, until there was nothing left but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you actually are. And that terrified them. Oh, that terrified them more than your breakdown ever could, because a broken person they could pity, music could manage, they could control. But a person who broke themselves open on purpose, who weaponized their own pain, who turned their trauma into clarity, that's a threat they don't have a manual for. They watched you withdraw and thought you were hiding in shame, licking your wounds, too embarrassed to show your face. But you weren't hiding. You were studying. Studying them. Studying the patterns. Studying who showed up and who disappeared. Studying who sent superficial comfort and who actually checked in. Music. Studying who celebrated your suffering and who mourned your struggle. You were running the most brutal audit of your entire life. And honey, most of them failed spectacularly. They revealed themselves in your absence. Music. Their masks slipped when they thought you weren't watching. Their true intentions bled through their fake concern. And you took notes, mental notes, soul notes, the kind of notes that don't need paper because they're burned into your memory forever. You see, strategic breakdowns require one thing most people don't have: music, the ability to stay conscious while everything falls apart. Most people black out during their breakdowns. They dissociate. Music, they numb, they run, they cope, they medicate, they distract. But you, music, you stayed awake. You felt every single second of that pain. Music, you stayed awake, you felt every single second of that pain. Music, you sat in the fire and watched yourself burn. Not because you're masochistic, but because you knew that the only way to kill what was killing you was to let it burn completely. No half measures, no saving scraps of the old life, no clinging to people who were slowly poisoning you. Music. You torched it all and stood there fireproof, watching everyone panic because they realized you weren't asking for saving. Music. You were doing the saving yourself, and they weren't included in the rescue plan. Now, let's talk about what they saw versus what was actually happening, because music, this gap, this chasm, this grand canyon of misunderstanding is where your power lives. They saw isolation. Music, you were creating boundaries. They saw silence. You were conserving energy. They saw withdrawal. Music, you were strategically positioning. They saw tears. You were releasing toxins. Music, they saw breakdown. You were breaking through. They saw weakness. You were shedding dead weight. They saw chaos. You were reorganizing. They saw music ending. You were beginning. Every single thing they interpreted as your failure was actually your upgrade in progress. And the fact that they couldn't see it, couldn't recognize it, couldn't comprehend it, that just proves how far ahead of them you already were. And here's the kicker. Here's the part that's going to haunt them forever. You let them think they were right. You let them believe their narrative. You let them spread their rumors, update their theories, convince each other that you'd finally lost it. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't correct them. You didn't post clarifications or send paragraph texts explaining your side. You just disappeared into your breakdown like it was a cocoon. And while they were outside taking bets on whether you'd ever recover, you were inside completely rewiring your entire music existence. The caterpillar doesn't announce its transformation, It just emerges as a butterfly and makes everyone who doubted it look foolish. You did exactly that, except your wings are sharper, your flight is higher, and your destination is somewhere they'll never reach. They thought they were watching you crumble, but they were actually watching you shed. Shed the people who only loved the version of you that served them. Shed the environments that demanded you stay small. Shed the beliefs that kept you trapped. Shed the guilt that wasn't yours to carry. Shed the shame that was planted by people who couldn't handle your light. Shed the need for validation from people who were never going to give it. Shed the parts of yourself that were built to please others and suffocate you. Every tear was a release. Every sleepless night was a purge. Every moment of silence was a recalibration. Music. You weren't breaking, you were breaking free. And the chains you shattered, they're still lying on the ground where you left them. Rusting, useless, music. Evidence of a prison that no longer exists. Let's get into the traps, shall we? Because this is where it gets delicious. This is where your genius really shines. While they thought you were at your weakest, you were setting snares they didn't even know existed. You stopped arguing. Trap 1. Now they have no ammunition, no screenshots, no receipts of you being defensive or aggressive. Music. You stopped explaining yourself. Trapped 2. Now they look insane trying to justify their version of events without your participation. You stop showing up to places they expected you. Trap. Music. 3. Now they're obsessing over your absence instead of living their own lives. You stopped reacting to their provocations. Trap 4. Now they look desperate, pathetic, trying to get a response from someone who's moved. Music, music on. Every move you didn't make was a trap, and they walked into all of them willingly, eagerly, because they were so convinced you were broken that they didn't realize you were playing chess while they were still learning checkers. And the strategy of it all is truly masterful because you knew something fundamental about human nature that most people ignore. You knew that people will always reveal their true selves when they think you're powerless, when they think you're down, defeated, unable to fight back. That's when the masks come off. That's when the fake friends stop pretending. That's when the jealous ones celebrate. That's when the manipulators lose interest. Music. That's when the opportunists move on. That's when the truth emerges. Raw and ugly and undeniable. And you needed to see that truth. You needed to know exactly who you were dealing with. Music. So, you created the conditions for them to expose themselves. And they did spectacularly, enthusiastically, without a single shred of self-awareness. Music. You see, most people waste their breakdowns. They thrash around in the pain, make impulsive music decisions, burn bridges they'll regret, say things they can't take back, damage their reputation, sabotage their future. But not you. You weaponized yours. Music. You turned your lowest point into a laboratory. You used your pain as a filter, your struggle as a test. Music. Your absence as a mirror. And what did you discover? You discovered that half the people in your life were only there for the show. Music. You discovered that most of your relationships were transactional. You discovered that the ones who claimed to love you couldn't handle you when you weren't performing. You discovered that your success threatened more people than it inspired. You discovered that your authenticity made people uncomfortable. You discovered that the life you were living was designed to make everyone else comfortable at the expense of your soul. Now they're scrambling, aren't they? Now they're panicking. Now they're trying to backtrack, rewrite history, pretend they were always on your side, pretend they always believed in you, pretend they never doubted you. But you remember, oh, you remember, every single one of them. You remember who went silent when you needed support. You remember who spread rumors when you needed grace. You remember who laughed when you needed compassion. You remember who disappeared when you needed presence. You remember who weaponized your vulnerability when you needed protection. And that memory, that crystal clear memory of who showed their true colors during your darkest hour, that's your armor now. Music, impenetrable, unbreakable, forged in the fire they thought would consume you. Let's talk about what happens after a strategic breakdown. Music. Because this is where the real transformation becomes visible. This is where your power stops being potential, music, and starts being actual. You emerge different, not just healed, not just recovered, but fundamentally altered at a molecular level. Your tolerance for nonsense drops to zero. Your ability to detect lies becomes supernatural. Your boundaries become walls that nothing can scale. Your energy becomes precious, reserved only for people and projects that deserve it. Music. Your time becomes sacred, no longer wasted on people who don't value it. Your peace becomes non-negotiable. Music. Protected with a ferocity that scares people who are used to disturbing it. You become someone new, someone they don't recognize, someone they can't manipulate, someone music they can't predict, someone they can't control. And that drives them absolutely insane, doesn't it? Music, because they were counting on you staying broken, staying small, staying accessible, staying the same. They needed music, you to be the person they could always rely on to shrink so they could feel big. Music. They needed you to be the person who would always forgive so they could keep betraying. They needed you to be the person who would always explain so they could keep misunderstanding. They needed you to be the person who would always stay so they could keep misunderstanding. They needed you to be the person who would always stay so they could keep leaving. But you broke that cycle. You shattered that pattern. You refused to play that role. And now they're standing there holding scripts for a play you're no longer performing in, wondering why you won't read your lines, why you won't take your cues, why you won't react the way you used to. Here's what they're realizing now, slowly, painfully. Music in moments that wake them up at 3 in the morning covered in cold sweat. They're realizing that your breakdown wasn't about them at all. Music. It was about you, about your evolution, about your liberation, about your refusal to continue living a lie just because the truth was uncomfortable. They're realizing that you didn't break because of them. You broke because you were ready to break free from everything that was holding you back, and unfortunately for them, they were part of that everything. Music. They're realizing that the person they thought they knew, the person they thought they could predict, the person they thought they had figured out, music, that person died in that breakdown. And the person who emerged from the ashes is playing a completely different game with completely different rules on a completely different level. And the traps keep working, don't they? Music, because you're not even trying anymore, and they're still caught. They check your social media looking for signs of struggle, but all they find is silence or strategic glimpses of a life they're no longer part of. Trap sprung. Music. They try to reach out with casual messages, testing if you're still accessible. but you either don't respond or respond so briefly that it's clear you've moved on. Trap rung. Music? They try to use mutual friends to get information about you, but those friends either don't know or won't music tell because they respect your privacy. Now, trap sprung. They try to recreate the dynamics you used to have, but you're not participating, not engaging, not giving them the satisfaction of your energy. Music, trap sprung. Every attempt they make to pull you back into the old patterns. Music just reinforces how far you've traveled, how much you've changed, how completely you've transformed. You know what the most beautiful part of this whole strategy is? The part that music makes it absolutely genius. The part that elevates it from survival tactic to masterpiece. You're not angry anymore. You're not bitter. You're not resentful. You're not seeking revenge. You're not trying to prove them wrong. You're not waiting for apologies. You're not hoping they'll finally understand. You've transcended all of that. You've moved so far past the need for their validation, their acknowledgement, their comprehension, that they've become irrelevant. They're ghosts in a house you no longer live in. They're echoes. Music in a canyon you've already crossed. They're memories in a chapter you've already closed. And that music, that indifference, that genuine lack of emotional investment in their opinion of you, that's the ultimate power move they never saw coming because they were expecting anger. They were prepared for anger. They could have handled anger. Anger would have meant they still mattered, still had impact, still occupied space, music in your mind. But indifference is the void where their significance used music to be. Indifference is the silence that screams louder than any words ever could. Indifference is the proof that you've healed so completely that they're not even a scar, just a story, just a lesson, just a stepping stone you used to get to where you are now. Music. And they can't fight indifference. They can't guilt trip indifference. They can't guilt trip indifference. They can't gaslight indifference. Indifference is the fortress they'll never breach. And you built it during that breakdown they thought was your destruction. Let's address the elephant in the room. The question they're all asking but too proud to say out loud. How did you, music, do it? How did you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough? How did you weaponize your own pain? How did you emerge stronger instead of shattered? How did you transform while they stayed the same? The answer is going to frustrate them because it's simple, brutally simple. So simple they'll refuse to believe it. You stopped fighting the breakdown and started using it. You stopped resisting the pain and started learning from it. Music, you stopped running from the truth and started facing it. You stopped protecting people who hurt you and started protecting yourself. You stopped trying to save relationships that were killing you and started saving yourself. You stopped performing strength and started building it. You stopped faking recovery and started actually healing. Music. You made a decision that most people are too scared to make. The decision to let everything fall apart so you could see what was worth putting back together. And you know what you discovered? Most of it wasn't. Most of the relationships weren't worth saving. Most of the beliefs weren't worth keeping. Most of the patterns weren't worth repeating. Most of the people weren't worth fighting for. Most of the versions of yourself you were trying to maintain weren't even you. They were costumes. They were performances. They were sacrifices you made to music, keep everyone else comfortable while you suffocated. And when you let it all burn, when you allowed the breakdown to do its work, music, You found something underneath all that rubble. You found yourself. The real you, the uncensored you, the unapologetic you, the you that music doesn't need permission or validation or approval to exist. And that you, that authentic core self that emerged from the breakdown, that's the you they're dealing with now. And they don't have a playbook for music. They don't have tactics that work on someone who's already been to the bottom and climbed back up. They don't have manipulation techniques, music that land on someone who's seen through every illusion. They don't have guilt trips that affect someone who's released all false obligations. They don't have fear tactics that scare someone who's already faced their worst nightmares. They don't have anything that works on you anymore. Music. And that realization, that slow dawning understanding that you're immune to their old tricks, that's what's keeping them up at night. That's what's making them question everything. That's what's making them realize they lost something they'll never get back. They lost access. Access to your energy, access to your attention, access to your emotional labor, access to your forgiveness, access to your tolerance, music, access to your space, access to your future. They lost it all during that breakdown. And they didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late. They thought you were falling apart when you were actually falling away from them. Creating distance, building walls, changing locks, burning bridges, severing ties, cutting cords. Music, every day you spent in that breakdown was a day you spent extracting yourself from their grip. Music, and by the time they realized what was happening, you were already gone, already unreachable, already operating in a reality they have no access to.